Yes.
Okay. So, hi everyone, this is Kamlesh, and I'm part of the core team of Asset Mantle focusing on product development. And today we will go through a presentation on the basics of the Asset Mantle's builder stack. So let me quickly share the screen. Nikhil, can you verify if I have the access to share the screen?
Yes, you are allowed to share the screen. Is there any problem?
Okay, let me just.
Just a second. Yes, now check if you can share the screen.
Sure. I guess I'm gonna have to disconnect and reconnect. Just a minute.
Sure. Sorry for the technical inconvenience, folks. Stay tuned.
Sorry.
In the meanwhile, make sure that if you have any questions related to Asset Mantle, make sure that you put them in the Q&A section. Take note of them in the end of the session. Also, people watching this after the session, make sure that you drop your questions in the comment section on YouTube. So if there are any questions that needed to be answered, we'll try to answer them in the comments there as well. All the details related to the hackathon, as well as all the details related to the stack of Asset Mantle, will be available in the description box below. So make sure that you make use of the description box. So I have Kamlesh back here with me.
Yeah, I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Let me just try one more time. Okay.
I can see your screen now.
Oh, yeah. So sorry about that. I had to change some admin settings in my MacBook Air itself. Yeah, let me quickly jump into the point of focus presentation. Yeah. So let me quickly jump into the scope. So first of all, the presentation that you see in front of basically just a point of focus. So because this is a builder's presentation, so we'll be jumping through this particular presentation and also the JavaScript API, which is the whole of the API, which is mentioned in the repository for JavaScript SDK of Asset Mantle. The repository is named JavaScript client. And then we will also jump through some of the actual code and see how in TypeScript those SDKs are integrated and how you can directly import it as packages. Before covering all of that, let's first of all quickly go through the scope here. So before I show the JavaScript API and all the endpoints that connect to Asset Mantle SDK, first of all, there is some contextual understanding of the principles and the data structures that are used to build the chain code of Asset Mantle. So we will covering that, basically the concepts of Asset Mantle, what are DIDs, and how the primary entities of the Asset Mantle chain code, which is basically the identities, the orders, and the assets are created using DIDs. Once we have that context, then we will then go through the JavaScript API for Asset Mantle, which will cover all the basic operations for creating the transfer of value in the NFT economy that is created by Asset Mantle. And if permits later, we will also discuss about some quick ideas of how you can do rapid prototyping of dApps. This is basically at the front end level. Once you have already had the expertise of how to use JavaScript API, so how to quickly create a prototype of front end, what are the latest technologies that you can use, which is basically Next.js and what is Jamstack, and some of the very nifty tools that you can use. So this be quite important from the hackathon standpoint because of the requirement for very rapid prototyping of dApps, which is required. And finally, also the design aspect of the dApps, what kind of layouts works really well for most of the websites, and what kind of layout will work for the particular use case that we have, which is basically either creating a storefront, NFT storefront in Asset Mantle, creating marketplaces or simple websites where you can just showcase your NFTs and what kind of UI frameworks we have.
I think there was some issue with your network there.
So first of all, to base definition. Okay, am I audible now? Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, sorry
Yes.
about the network issue. Yeah, so first of all, quickly jump into what is Asset Mantle. This is basically for people who are quite new here and just getting introduced to Asset Mantle. So this is the basic definition that you will see in the marketing literature that we float in multiple channels. So Asset Mantle is a multi-tenant NFT marketplace framework. And this basically provides focus to two core stakeholders and collectors. Even though approach has to make it themselves and all the different kinds that
I think there's some problem with the
of
network,
Mantle.
Kamlesh.
And order complex logic, different type of logic. Okay. Am I audible now?
So you are audible, but the thing is, either your video is lagging or your audio is lagging. Like it's too glitchy. Can you check your Wi-Fi connection or something? I think there's some problem with it. Oops. It looks like some technical issue on Kamlesh's end. But in the meanwhile, guys, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the technical issues. I'm not sure why the
Yeah, I think he's stuck again. Yeah, I think I can see you now.
Okay. Let me try to disable the video
Yeah,
and see
that will
if
be
it
better.
works. Am I audible now, Nikhil?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about the technical issues once again. Okay, so I hope you free.
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Okay. So we were talking about identities, orders, and assets. So basically, identities are the accounts where your assets are stored. So this basically represents the stakeholders or actors. And asset here is represented by NFTs and all the other assets that exist in the NFT ecosystem. And orders here refers to the complex logic used to perform a principle of DLT, which is basically actors, assets, and actions. So actors basically refers to the users and their identities. Assets refers to whatever kind of asset is used for allocations or any other kind of value creation. Action is basically the logic that is used to create the transfer of value between actors and assets. So this action can be as simple as, let's say, transferring the asset from one actor to another actor, which is basically a transfer of token. So it could be as simple as that, or it could be a very complex operation. For example, in Asset Mantle, let's say we are taking an asset, we are splitting it into multiple fractional NFTs, and one of the fractional we are putting it for auction. Rest of the fractional NFTs we are putting it in cold storage in a mode where it is continuously promoting itself in regular time periods. So this comprises of a sample example of a very complex operation. So that such operations can be created using orders. So these three entities of Asset Mantle, which is identities, orders, and assets, are all created using DID document. So at the very of the whole data structure of Asset Mantle chain code, we have DID-based documents. And using these DID-based documents, all these three entities are created. So this provides us with a huge advantage of creating a very super custom and highly complex logic that can be created either for assets, very complex kind of assets, or very complex kind of orders, or basically which refers to a very complex transfer of value that needs to happen between this. And even in case of identity, from the very basic identity, which is called the nub ID, all the way to a very complex identity, which contains a lot of information, can be created. So all are DID based. And each of these entities, like I said, in the foundation have a DID based document. And in this DID document, we have metadata. So this is true not only for assets, but also for orders and identity. So in assets, you might be aware of metadata properties, like for example, some kind of a CryptoKitty NFT. So it might have its own features, traits as they call, the whiskers and the fur color, this, that, and all. So similarly, you can create a host of metadata, not just for assets, but also for identities and order. And these metadata properties are once again categorized into, they are either meta or mesa property. So meta property is basically a property where the actual value is stored, and mesa is where the hash value is stored. So this is one perspective, which is basically the properties being either meta or mesa. And this is another perspective, which is basically the properties being immutable or mutable, which means that once you create a certain kind of DID classification of an asset, then you can decide what all would be the metadata properties for them. And then you can, for those particular properties, you can decide if they are meta-based or mesa-based, which is if you're storing the proper properties or just the hash value of the properties. And also you can define if they are immutable or mutable. So immutable will be the properties whose values cannot be changed later. They are set only once. And mutable properties is basically, the NFT properties that can be changed later as well. So yeah. So basically, these two perspectives brings us a permutation or combination of 4, which is basically a property can be meta and immutable or meta and mutable. And once again, it can be mesa and immutable or mesa and mutable. So this, once again, provides us with a very powerful feature of creating a host of metadata for which basically encompasses all kind of scenarios. So because we are using a DID-based document, once the chain code is set and once the state values are stored in the Asset Mantle chain, it will still be possible for you to upgrade the chain and change the values, change the functionality in any which way possible. So that was second feature. And the third feature would be the difference between identity and provision address. As I had mentioned before, identity is the account where all the NFTs are. And identities use something called splits. This is, let's call it, like to simplify things, splits is the basically economic unit that is used to do the transfer. So identities have splits, and provision address, which are like the normal addresses that you see, like Asset Mantle accounts and all. So provision addresses are used to operate these identities. So provision address will hold the coins like MNTL coin, which is the Mantle, and the identities will store splits. So if you want to convert the coins into splits, that operation is called wrapping operation, and the reverse is called unwrapping, which basically we'll anyway cover in the JavaScript API. So let's quickly jump to the JavaScript API now. So this has been updated in the readme.markdown file for the JavaScript client repo. So this will be quickly made public very soon. So the Asset Mantle SDK, the Asset Mantle JavaScript API itself is also registered in NPM. So you can directly import it as Mantle.js. And right now we have already given the request to be for this NPM to be published in the NPM registry. So once that happens, you'd be able to directly access using NPM Mantle NPM install Mantle. But if you are having any trouble doing that, you can directly quote the GitHub URL and get the whole SDK. This is one of the example usages that I've mentioned. So for example, if you want to query the identities, so first of all, you can import query identities. This is a class of sorts from this URL, which is basically Mantle.js build transaction ID query. And using this object, you create a controller object by passing the path. And this path is basically the Asset Mantle API path. And once you have the controller object, you can use it to call the function, which is basically controller object dot function. And these functions are what are mentioned in this huge list that we'll go through quickly, which represents the multiple functions that is used for operating the economy of Asset Mantle. So this is the argument. And once you provide this, what you will get in return is a promise object. So once again, you will have to do dot then and go through the rest of the logic. So the API for the JavaScript API itself is categorized into, once again, the transaction and utilities. So in transaction, once again, first of all, let's go through the function, the entities itself. So identity. So define identity dot define. Basically, you have to give till here. Till here, it'll be the same, which is basically Mantle.js build transaction identity. And define identity dot define will be used to create the schema for a certain identity. So this is very similar to creating a class. You're defining a class of how an identity looks like, what created using the defined identity. So this will use the document, the class structure that was laid out here, and create an instance of it. Once again, we have the same two distinctions here, which is basically issue identity dot issue and issue identity dot create identity issue message, which has a similar difference like we had seen above, which is basically in issue identity, we have the mnemonic here as well, which means that it will not only create the message, but it will also use the mnemonic to sign and send. It will initiate the message. But in this case, it will only create the message object and return back. And then it is up to you how to sign it and send it to a proper node. So moving on to next, we have nub identity dot nub. So this is used to create a nub ID. So first of all, what is nub ID? So we have about identities being a DID document, and identities itself having a lot of metadata in them, meta-based, mesa-based, immutable, non-immutable. So nub ID refers to the most smallest unit of ID, most basic ID, which has no details in it. It simply has just a single ID, which represents the identifier for that identity itself. So like technically it has two properties. One is nub ID itself, identity itself, and one is the classification ID. So every time we define an identity, like I mentioned, it looks like a class document where we are deciding what should be the metadata involved in that class. So it creates a classification ID for that particular structure. So that classification ID is also present in the nub ID. So nub ID is the smallest unit of ID. Want to create an identifier that represents a certain user without giving any information about the user. We don't know, his name, address, or any of that sort. Just a simple identity that that will have existence in the Asset Mantle chain and which can be associated to a certain user. So this is what this creates, nub identity dot nub. And once again, the nub identity dot create identity nub message, which refers to the same operation, but instead of instantiating the whole transaction, it will just create the message object for creating the nub itself and return back with the message object. Moving on to provision identity dot provision. So once again, going to the slide here, like I had mentioned, there are two aspects, two different kinds of accounts, which is identity account and provision account. So identity account is basically the account which holds the NFTs, and provision addresses are something, your mantle addresses, which are used to operate on this identity. So if you want to transfer some NFT from this identity to some other identity, you will have to use an address that is associated with this identity, and which is called the provision addresses. And only those provision addresses will have the rights to operate on the identity's assets. So this provision identity dot provision is used to create that provision address. So once again, here, this will create the whole transaction, and this will create the message object that is required for creating the provision identity. The provision identity is very similar to a normal address, and that is why it holds the coins and tokens. Identities hold the NFTs or assets, which are basically DID-based assets. Query identity, once again, so we have query identity and query identity with ID. There is no message object-based functionality here. So query identity, effectively, very simple, is used to query the identities. So this will be query identities dot query identity will effectively return a whole list of identities that exist in the chain. And query identities with ID. You will have to pass an argument of ID, and it will return back the identity that is associated with this particular ID. This is used to get the information of a certain identity from the chain itself. Now, these are all for identifiers. Now let's come to the next entity, DID-based entity, which is called assets, which is basically the NFTs and the fractional NFTs and all the different assets which is represented in the chain. So what are the JavaScript API for those? So we have burn asset.burn. So this is used to burn the asset. It basically completely removes it from existence. Once again, it has two structure, which is basically .burn and .create asset burn message. The latter one, which returns just a message object. And then we have define asset.define. So whenever you see the word define, so this, if this is one of the doubts I believe that we had received from several people. So there is define asset, and then there is issue asset. So define asset is basically building the definition of this particular. So definition of an entity. So what will be the mutable traits and immutable traits? What will be the structure of that entity? So you're basically just, this is very similar to a class itself. And when you do issue asset, that is when it uses that class definition, which will have its own particular classification ID. And then you will instantiate it and create an actual NFT or actual asset out of it. So here we have define asset.define, and that is used to create a definition or a class structure for that asset itself. So this basically contains even the metadata-based arguments, as you can see here. And this is once again object for that same. And we have mint asset. In this case, mint asset is basically the instantiation of that asset itself and minting it into existence. So as you can see here, we actually provide a classification ID here. So this classification ID actually covers this whole definition that was created in the define asset during this stage. So you can the mutable property value and the mutable value. And once again, this function is simply a function which does the same operation, but returns simply the message object instead of instantiating that transaction. Query and query asset with ID, once again, as we had seen in identifiers as well, same is the case in asset. This basically queries the asset. The top one gives the complete list of all the assets, and the bottom one is query asset with ID, in which you have to pass an argument of ID, and it will search for that particular asset and return its data. So these were all the APIs, JavaScript APIs for the asset entity. Now, like I had mentioned before, once you define an asset or once you define an identity, you're defining all the metadata properties that will go with it, mutable, non-mutable, meta-mesa, and such. And once you have given a proper structure to it, once you have defined the proper structure, either using define asset or define identity, so it creates a unique classification ID for that particular structure. So this basically is, to simplify things, it is a hash of the collective of all the metadata properties. But then again, to keep it deterministic, what we are doing is we are ordering all the metadata properties in a certain order, and then only we are taking a hash of sorts. And that provides a deterministic way for us to calculate the classification ID. So in these set of APIs will and this one is with ID, which is basically provide the ID as an argument, and we'd be able to get that particular classification. Yes. Now going to the maintainer aspect. So maintainers are basically, the whole maintainer pertains to the access control aspect in the Asset Mantle ecosystem. So you can define certain maintainers who will have, once again, there are like infinite number of ways that you can define how the access control for a certain set of NFTs, a single NFT, or the whole ecosystem economy of NFTs needs to be controlled, what privileges need to be had by who. And because, once again, to reiterate, because all of these is created using the DID-based documents as the foundational data structure, this provides us with the option to, basically create our own privileges in any sort of way, and what kind of access control needs to be given to a certain person or a group of people. So going through the functions, the APIs for maintainer aspects. So we have deputize maintainer.deputize, which is basically if there is a certain maintainer already available, that maintainer can deputize another person. So basically provide certain kind of roles and privileges to another person. And that person would be able to, it depends on what logic goes in here. So they'd be able to either, define NFTs for that particular classification, or create NFTs or burn assets and such. Once again, create deputized message will only return you the message object instead of initiating the whole transaction. Query maintainer with ID, once again, so you can search for the maintainers who have what access control, and you just have to provide the ID in the argument, and this will return you that particular maintainer data for that ID. Now going to the third entity that we had mentioned, which is order itself. The order is basically, in very simple terms, how you are creating the transfer of value between the assets and the identifiers, basically the actors and the assets, how the whole transfer of assets between the actors or the actors between the assets is happening. So that whole logic is created in order. So once again, define order.define. So this is actually used to just define the order, basically creating a schema or a class definition of sorts. So once again, here, as you can see, you define what would be the mutable trades, what would be the immutable trades, mutable meta trades and immutable meta trades as well. And the second one, which is basically create order defined message, once again, same as the top, but it will just return the message object. So we have define order, and then we have make order. The make order here in this case is effectively instantiate that order that was defined above. So creating an order, actual order into existence. So that order, once again, can be anything, depends on what kind of logic that you're creating. For example, a simple auction, you want to auction your NFT. put it into the marketplace. So you can either define a certain auction of that style, and once that definition already exists in the chain, you'd be able to make that order. So as you can see here, one of the arguments is the classification ID itself. It's generated once you define the order. So once you give that classification ID, so it creates that certain order. So make order and create order, make message is just to return the message object for it. Take order. So once you have made an order, like for example, auction for a certain asset that somebody owns. So now it is out in the market. Now take order will be, once it is out in the market, if somebody wants to purchase that order, or if it's like a betting kind of auction, so he can bet his own amount. So any kind of action, reactive action that is taken for the order that is made will be covered in take order. So once again, for take order, so this is once again basically in here, it uses order ID. So there is no classification ID here, because take out. So if you want to revoke it, so you can use the cancel order.cancel. So as you can see here, you can only cancel an order which is already created. That this operates from an order ID perspective. And once again, we have create order cancel message, which will return back the message object for the same. Query order and query order with ID, very similar to the other two entities as well, just basically identity and asset. So in query order, it will return the list of all the orders. And in query order with ID, you are giving an ID as an argument, and it will return the data for that particular order. Now, going to the meta section for transaction. So meta pertains to the meta property itself. So at the meta level itself, you can do your queries here. So because this chain, obviously, this will evolve into a much more sophisticated setup. So right now, from the meta standpoint, we have given very simple, query meta, where query meta with ID, in which you can give, once again, argument of ID. Be created either as a meta or a mesa. So some of the data might not be, the actual data might not be stored in the blockchain, in the Asset Mantle chain. So if you want to reveal that data, and if the proper pages and access controls are allowed to reveal the data, then you can use reveal meta.reveal. And this will reveal the true data for that particular metadata property. And now we have, once again, create meta reveal message, which returns the same logic, but only the message object for the same. Now, jumping to transaction splits. So like I had mentioned, splits is basically fractionalizing of NFTs, and splits is basically the economy of sorts, which is used to do the transaction. So going to the slide once again, so we have identity and provision addresses. So the provision address is what stores the coins, like the MNTL token, which is the protocol token of Asset Mantle. And identity will be the kind of accounts which will store the splits. So if you want to, let's say, purchase an NFT, so first of all, you will need to have some MNTL tokens in your provision address. And then you will do an operation of wrap and unwrap. Let me see if okay, it's here. So wrap splits.wrap. So this is basically used to convert a coin into a split. So once you have wrapped the token, then it will be available to be used as the economy in the NFT network of Asset Mantle. So you can use it to purchase your NFTs. And unwrap here, okay, once again, splits wrap message will return the message object. And unwrap here is the reverse operation, which is basically, if you have the splits, you can convert it back to coins. Yeah. Okay. So I hope this is clear. So this system is a little different in the Asset Mantle chain as compared to what you usually see in OpenSea and such, where you have only one account, which actually as both the place where you store the coins and also you store the NFTs. But in this case, we have an identity account, which is the proper account where NFTs are stored, and the provision address is an operator key of sorts that is used to perform all the transactions and transfer of value pertaining to that identity. So if anyone is aware of EOS chain, so the accounts of EOS is also, there are similarities in the accounts of EOS chain in which for every account that is created, there is a provision address of sorts or a provision key of sorts. In fact, in EOS chain, there are two keys. One is the admin key and one is the transaction key. So the transaction keys are used to perform all the transactions, and the admin key will be used to either add in more provision addresses to that account or remove the existing provision addresses. Only admin can do. But in this case, we have provision addresses and already created the provision address for that identity. You can use that provision address to create more provision addresses. So this once again provides us with the flexibility to do like infinite different kinds of operations, to have infinite different kinds of ownership of that identity. So that one identity can have multiple provision addresses, and they can all be governed by a very complex logic of who can actually do what kind of transaction. And that is why this particular structure of having identity and provision addresses to operate the identity becomes very ideal for a scenario like NFT ecosystem. So once again, going back to the JavaScript API. So we had seen query splits with ID. So this is basically to query a certain split once you give the ID for it. And send splits.send. So this is used to send the split from one identity to another. This is basically not very different from send coin, if you know, that we do for provision addresses or the regular addresses of Asset Mantle, where you send MNTL token from one address to another. Very similar to that here, send splits.send will send the splits from one identity to another. And once again, this is just the message object for that particular operation. Yes. So those were all the JavaScript API for the splits and everything pertaining to splits. Now moving to transaction accounts and transaction bank. This basically pertains to the provision addresses where we hold the coins and not the identities. So you must be already familiar with these functions, which you would have used before. They just create account or create. You create and instantiate an account in the Asset Mantle chain. So this basically pertains to the regular address, like that is used to store coins and such. So you are creating that account, and recover account is used to recover a certain account using a mnemonic. And finally, the bank, the bundle, which is basically the most basic operations that we do for provision addresses or the normal addresses, which is basically send coin. So sending, for example, sending of the MNTL token from sending of MNTL token from one account to another. And once again, this is just a function that receives the message object for the same. Now, apart from the transactions bundle, we have got utilities bundle, where some this basically is more functional in nature, pure functions in nature. These JavaScript APIs, so create wallet will actually create a wallet. So in this case, you can provide two arguments, which is the mnemonic string itself and the optional BIP39 passphrase. So this BIP39 passphrase will be used along with the mnemonic to create your, and it will return you with the 0 address. In fact, if you change the passphrase, it will provide you with a different address. So this is a deterministic create wallet function where you are providing a mnemonic. And the second one is create random wallet, in which you are only providing the BIP39 passphrase and no mnemonic. So basically, it will generate a random mnemonic, and then it will use the optional BIP39 passphrase that you have provided on top of that mnemonic, and it will return back a wallet object. And then once again, there's a simple function called get wallet, in which you can provide the mnemonic and the BIP passphrase. And if there is a wallet that is already created, in create store function, once again, you are giving the mnemonic and the password, and it will create an encrypted key store file. Now, the difference between create store, as you can see here, you see mnemonic and password, and in this case, create wallet, you see mnemonic and BIB32 passphrase. So the difference here is when you provide the optional BIB3239 passphrase, it will combine with the mnemonic and create a different address. So if you change the passphrase, the address itself changes. But in this case, this is not a passphrase, it is a password, which means this password is used to encrypt the key store file. So the key store JSON file that is generated will be encrypted using this password. If you want to open that key store file, you will have to enter this password. But it will not change your address. It will not combine with the mnemonic. It will not act as a passphrase and combine with the mnemonic and input a different address altogether. This password is only used to encrypt this key store file. So this is used to create a key store file, create store, and then we have decrypt store, which is basically if you've already created an encrypted key store file, then you can provide the file, the path of the file itself, and the password that you mentioned here that was used to encrypt the key store. So you can provide this password to decrypt that file, and what you will receive in return is the decrypted wallet, the decrypted key store wallet itself that can be used to perform all the transactions. So these were all the JavaScript API that can be leveraged by the dev team to create your own apps, create your own functionalities. Now, let me quickly show you an example of how the SDK is created. For example, this is a TypeScript file. First of all, the whole of JavaScript API is built in TypeScript, strongly typed. So this is an example of query identities. If you remember, query identities is used to query the whole list of identities. So as you can see here, it actually returns a promise object. So it's an async function. So it has to be implemented in an async way. And this path is, this basically, first of all, extends Asset Mantle. So Asset Mantle is basically the place where you provide a path also in the argument. So this path, if you remember, is the API path that is used to perform that operation. So it takes that particular path and it creates a get object, and it will resolve if there are no errors, then it will resolve that object and create a promise object. And this particular promise object can be used using the async logic to query a whole list of identities. Because right now we are in the dev stage, so these are very simple APIs that we have built, like query identities, even though this might be a little simple API will be perfect for fast prototyping, especially in a hackathon environment. So this is basically the structure of how everything, all the TS files are created. So we have a top level class like query identity, which Next.js, if a lot of people might have known of React. So Next.js is basically a framework that is built on top of React. So nowadays it's becoming the norm of creating Jamstack-based apps, which provides us, which is quite performant first of all, and it is not very expensive at the back end. So Jamstack actually refers to J is for JavaScript, A is for API, and M is for markup. So JavaScript here refers to the set of frameworks that is built in JavaScript, for example, Next.js. And A is for API. So Jamstack actually refers to a purely static site instead of a server rendered site or having some logic that needs to be executed at the server end. Most of the apps that used to be built by people used to be server rendered, or it will be purely SPA, single page apps. But now the Jamstack is becoming quite popular. So for the sake of prototyping in hackathon, if you want to if you create an Next.js app template which strictly follows the Jamstack principles, this would provide you with a very performant and very simple but very performant application. So once again, going to the definition of Jamstack, J is for JavaScript, which refers to the React and Next.js, the frameworks that exist in JavaScript. And because it is a static app, then if there are any dynamic logic that exists in your app, that needs to be implemented directly as which is basically API based. So the whole app will be purely static, but all the dynamic aspects will be handled as an API. And M is for markup, which actually refers to the HTML itself, which signifies the fact that this is a purely static site. So once you build the app, all you will get is a bunch of HTML, bunch of markup files, HTML, and probably XMLs if that data pertains. Yeah. So if you have heard of Create Cosmos app, which is actually created by Cosmology. So this is a complete app template here. So you can use Create Cosmos app. You must have heard of Create React app and Create Next app. Create React app, which is used to create single page apps, and Create Next app, which is used to build next-based apps, which enables both server-side rendering and static on a page-by-page level, basically. So this basically is a Next.js app application template, which also has been implemented some extra features. For example, the Cosmos kit that I mentioned here. So what is Cosmos kit? Cosmos kit is basically the blockchain integration aspect in your app template itself. So they have already created an application integration. So this is basically how it looks like if it's visible. So if you can see, this is the basic app template that is generated even by Next.js, the same kind of structure, but there is a difference here. This also comes complete with the Cosmos integration of Wallet, the Kepler integration of Wallet. And this actually supports both Kepler and Wallet Connect, basically Wallet Connect based Kepler. So this particular app template can be used for both accessing via laptop or mobile. If you are in laptop, you can connect to the extension of Cosmos. And if you are in mobile view, so you can use the Wallet Connect feature of Kepler to connect to your native app of Kepler as well. So this is one of the nifty tool that you can directly use to very quickly prototype. And this comes with, and if you look at the logic of Connect Wallet itself, this button itself, you will see that for every event, they have properly included the logic. So once you click on it, then the wait, what happens, and for every event after connection, if connection is established, connection is not established, it is still being established. Connection is established, but the addresses were not sought, or connection was not established. So for each event, they have given proper logic. So this might be a pretty good place for you to start prototyping your whole app. Now jumping to the last aspect, which is basically the design aspect of dApps. Okay, so from the design aspect, obviously the builders, a lot of builders face problem as to what kind of design should I have for my app. So when in doubt, go with two column layout. So let's see if I can find an example of a 2-column layout. It's also called admin UI template. So if you look at admin UI kit examples, you will see some examples of a 2-column layout, something of this sort. So basically, there will be a sidebar on the left, and the content will be on the right. So all the sidebar will have all the features of the app. So one of the advantages of having a sidebar on the left is that somebody, any layman or somebody who is visiting your app for the first time, if it's a single column layout, even though it looks quite good, they won't be able to identify what are all the features that are covered in your app. There might be like 5 or 6 features that are covered in your app, and the landing page might show only the first feature. To get to the second, third, fourth, fifth feature, they will have to click on the hyperlinks that are all across in the app, and then go to the next feature, go to the next feature. But if there is a sidebar here, then we can make all the features of that app here itself as menu links, and they'd be able to click here and go to that particular menu. And then there are multiple modes, once again, for creating this two-column layout, which is basically in the laptop view, this can be persistent sidebar, in which the sidebar is always on, or it could be collapsible sidebar, in which the sidebar completely disappears and there is a hamburger icon on top when you click on it, and the drawer opens up. Or there is a third mode that is also becoming very popular, which is basically icon-based sidebar, in which the sidebar does collapse, but it does not completely disappear. It collapses into this icon view. So one of the advantages of this is when you are in the laptop mode, you can actually hover through these icons and it will show the tooltip. And another advantage of this two-column layout is the two-column layouts are very favorable when it comes to responsiveness or of apps. So even in prototype stage in hackathons, when you're building the app, you don't want to put a lot of bells and whistles as far as design is concerned. You want to keep it simple and elegant, but keeping it responsive is becoming a very important parameter. So two-column layout works really well in responsiveness. So when you are looking at the laptop view, you can probably keep the sidebar persistent with all the menu items mentioned here. But when it goes to the mobile view, the sidebar will disappear completely. It will not be in icon mode. It will disappear completely, and only the main section is visible. And if you want to open the sidebar, you will have either a hamburger icon or it will be a swipeable drawers. So there are some UI frameworks like Material UI, if you have heard of Material UI, and even Ant UI that provides swipeable drawers, in which you can swipe in your mobile Chrome, the far left, and it will open the drawer. So the third mode that I talked about, which is basically the icon mode of sidebar, is not favorable for the mobile view, because obviously it only shows the icon, and the people who are laymen or people who have not frequently visited your site and don't know what those icons represent will not be able, they will have to actually click through these icons to see what they actually signify. If you are in laptop view, obviously you can hover through these icons and it will show the tooltip for them. But in the mobile view, that won't be possible. So usually we go with this two-column layout. So if you have doubts, okay, what to do, how should I lay out my app, quickly go with two-column layout. But then again, there is a note of caution here as well. The two-column layout works quite well for almost most of the scenarios, most of the use cases. But in the case, if you are creating a marketplace of sorts, let's say something very similar to Open, like we have in OpenSea. So as you can see, OpenSea very interestingly has kept a very single column layout, and there is a reason for that. And that is because if we open an NFT here, let's say, if I go to the Explore page, yes. So for an NFT marketplace, and this is also common in the e-commerce marketplaces as well, there is one feature which is basically once you open a collection, you will see a whole host of filtering aspects, filtering data, switches and checkboxes and drop downs, as you can see here. And this actually creates a problem because you cannot have both. You cannot have a sidebar here as well, and then next to it, we have all these filtering mechanisms, which might be, from the design standpoint, unfavorable. And that is why a lot of marketplaces are now switching back to single column view. So this trend is becoming common for both NFT marketplaces and e-commerce as well. So if you open Flipkart as well, so there was a time when Flipkart used to have a sidebar, a very famous sidebar. It used to exist both in the in the desktop-based sites and also mobile sites and mobile apps as well. But now there is literally no sidebar. So because once again, they will have the same kind of filtering mechanism. And because there are a lot of properties here, a lot of metadata that needs to be filtered out. So this itself will be a long list. So this will actually look like a sidebar of sorts. So we already have something that signifies the sidebar. So my test will go with a single column layout. So just to summarize once again, from the design layout standpoint, if you are building an app, what to do? When in doubt, go with two. If you are specifically focusing on creating NFT marketplaces, then once again, you will have to go back to the drawing board to decide what kind of layout you need to do. Probably go with a single column layout, because there'll be a whole host of filtering, checkboxes and radio buttons and drop-down values that you will have to implement for certain pages. For example, collections or explore page and such. Yes. So this basically covers most of the aspects of rapid app prototyping and JavaScript API. And if there are any questions, I'd be willing to take them now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamlesh, for covering almost all these aspects in so much detail, especially you covering the design aspect of it, which someone who has seen a lot of hackathon projects. I think a lot of people kind of ignore the design aspect of things in favor of creating a better product in the end. But I think design is also equally important when trying to build like a good solution for a hackathon. So thank you for that.
True.
Guys, if you have any other questions, make sure you drop them in the Q&A section. All those who are watching this recording after the fact, make sure that you drop your questions in the chat section, and we'll make sure that we take them to Kamlesh and try to answer them as soon as possible. If you have not joined already, make sure you join the Lumos Metaverse Discord server. Also make sure that you definitely register for the Lumos Metaverse Open Build for Web3 hackathon, and build your projects using the Asset Mantle tools that we've just covered in this session. With that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I hope to see you all in another session very, very soon. Bye.
Thanks, guys.